Hello, hello. Oy, oy, oy. It took longer than I expected. Also, maybe internet is being weird. Who knows? Okay. How do I... Cool. Yeah. Okay. This is real good. We're on a delay. And it's not coming up in... Ugh. Why, oh why? Reload. So there's freaking... Oh, that's why. Dumb. Okay. I'm here. Jeez. Is there actually someone in here? That'd be cool. It says I have a concurrent viewer. Who are you? Who's in here? Need a blanket. Hello. Who's in here? Give me a... Oh, hey there. Hi. What's going on? So, I don't remember... I'm not sure how long you've been with us. I don't know if, like, you saw the other one of these that I did. It's a lot more relaxed, and wonky than the Fix It and Post. It's a little less organized. The one thing that I'm just going to be here by myself today, and the one thing that I want to do is get off the internet here. I want to have my Discord up, and this is just like an hour-ish. Obviously, I started late. I was having some issues getting it up and running, but I just want to like take about an hour and touch base. That's basically what I want to be able to do. Something I'd really like to be able to do with patrons moving forward more frequently, which is why I just decided to do this sort of impromptu yesterday. Yeah, I want to be able to touch base with you guys and use Discord possibly. Like, this is something I did last time I did this. I was able to like touch base with Jackson Hayes, who had been working on a monologue for something, and we were able to I was able to watch his monologue, have some thoughts on it, and then call him up, have a chat, and that was really cool. So, just to talk about like his process and his thoughts and how to, just how to think about these things. Sort of like going off of the Fix It in Post, the idea that editing and re-editing the same thing is an art in and of itself, right? Like the process of practicing editing and looking at the same piece over and over and doing edits and re-edits. I kind of feel like that's a process that works with like editing yourself, right? So doing the work on yourself, actually like never thinking like I'm done, but like continuing to look at who you are. So that's why I'd say fix me in post. Glad you're here. If so far I only know that it's Mihai. Tell me what your art is. What your are you a photographer? Are you a painter? I don't know. You tell me what you are. This is right now, since you're the only person that I know is in here. This is just going to basically be a one-on-one chat, and I might be just talking at you for a little while about some random stuff. I have a couple thoughts on where I'd like to go. A couple ideas. I actually brought my journal, but we may never even get to crack it open because we might just play. Yeah. How do I say this? I was just talking with Brendan about this a couple days ago, and we were talking about just the idea of perfectionism, right? People being perfectionists. It's like such a I don't know, it's such a Western ideal, right? It's like such a like kind of like Puritan. I've been brought up, I've been forged in the US, so I can only attest to like it's very American culture being a perfectionist. Everyone wants to be perfectionist. Everyone wants to be, smarter and stronger and work harder and ignore their family more. Like it's just like what the culture wants. It's kind of crazy making. But isn't it true that like that's asinine, right? Like being willing to and open to and excited to make mistakes. That's how we learn, and that's what you just said. That's how we learn when playing around with an edit. It's how we learn when engaging in our lives, right? Like I don't know. I fuck up all the time, and like obviously no one wants to fuck up because depending on the circumstance, it doesn't feel good. But it's like if your life was perfect, it would be boring. If your life was free of failure, it would either be boring or it would be incredibly stressful because you'd just be waiting constantly for the other shoe to drop. You'd be waiting for that moment of failure. If you lived a life free of failure, free of mistakes, you'd be constantly like, oh my God, what would that be like? Everybody will leave me. Everybody's going to hate me if I, and that's like obviously false. So I don't know. I'm going to like probably stop myself quite a few times because I could go on tangents. One of them being like, if you think about failure as an echo of the way that that evolution works, right? Like failure is built into us. Somebody else could say like you could play devil's advocate and you could say like actually success is built into us because natural selection means that failure has you die and only the ones who were predisposed to success blah 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 get to survive and procreate. But like I kind of think you could look at it the other way, which is like we're creatures, like all creatures are sort of designed to keep failing and tumbling forward, and like that's how we as species figure out how to move forward, is like literally by failing, by just by falling down the hill. Like it's just literally like you fall down the hill and you keep falling until all of a sudden a foot hits the ground and you start running instead of falling, so that's like obviously a very huge tangent off of what the original thing was, but but yeah, so this is going to be about, I think these are going to be about failing. They're going to be about, you know, editing ourselves. The last one I did of these was like, I looked at some material and I got to talk about it, and I got to like play with, um, what the, like, ways that we could edit that material differently. Um, Today, uh, I'm gonna just probably ramble about some random stuff that I've been thinking about art, and see if that's useful. This is still like super in trial, like super in trial. Like we really don't even know what we want out of this. Obviously, like, my goal for these is that eventually I'd get friends and guests in to be chatting with me or chatting with me and Brandon. I could have done one yesterday. I had my dear friend and collaborator Doug Lang, who writes music with me. That would be a fun chat. Things like that. Like, we just have a lot of friends who are artists, and it'd be really cool to get them into our circles and get you guys exposed to them, them exposed to you, and start different conversations. But anyway, that's I don't know. I'm gonna put a period on that intro. So you're a photographer. You're kind of a photographer. What does that mean? You'll have to tell me in the comments. I'll vamp for a while because we're on a delay, but you'll have to tell me what kind of a photographer means. If you're a photographer, you're a photographer, right? I had a really hard time for a long time, like, committing to saying that I, was a musician, or that I was an artist, or that I was a composer. Yeah, like, because it's hard. It's like really hard to decide to say, I am this thing, because you put a stress on it, I guess. That's like the perfectionist culture, right? Like, oh, you're a photographer? Show me your stuff. You must be amazing. Like, no, you can be a photographer if you want to be. I could be a composer. I compose music. I haven't composed high art music in a bunch of years, but I compose music all the time. And every action and interaction with friends and family, and every time I go out into nature and admire the trees, and every time I cook a meal, that's composing music. So I would love, yeah. Tell me about the kind of photography that you like to shoot. I think being a photographer or being an artist just means that you look through a lens, right? So, yeah, tell me about the kind of stuff you do. And while you do that, oh, let me see, just came in. Good. Yeah, shoot photography on your iPhone. iPhones are fucking amazing. I'm obviously not that old, but I'm 27, and like, I remember what it was like, when my parents had like big brick cell phones that didn't have cameras, and then when they had cameras that were like 1/15 of a megapixel, and then I had a flip phone, like, that had shit cameras, and like the fact that even this is an iPhone 8, and even an iPhone 8, like, the camera's so good, and it's nothing compared to the 11, but it's amazing that you can hold something so small that's pretty fucking simple and shoot a really good photo. So power to you. Make photos and be happy with what you make. That's so good. I'll have to check your stuff out. Pop a link up so I can check your stuff out later, or right now. I don't know. But that's only like if you want to do that, or if you want me to do that. But so in the meantime, like, one of my desires for this conversation, for this ongoing series, is like that the boundaries between mediums should dissolve, right? The boundaries between who we are and what we do, our titles and all that kind of stuff, like, it's unnecessary. We're a community of artists. That's what we are on this Patreon. Like, what an amazing thing to be able to say, right? To be able to commit to say, we're this community of makers, and that's the community I'd really like to be growing. And like, a community of people that want to look at our stuff and see behind the scenes stuff and all that is like great too. But there's a reason why a lot of people are coming for the behind the scenes stuff, or for the newsletter, or even for the archive. Like the reason people are coming for that is because they want a glimpse into something, or they want to be part of something that is looking to explore moving forward. Um, like I'll talk a little bit about some of my making. I'm gonna just kind of like vamp on that for a couple minutes. That's like really the only thing that I had planned for today. I'm not even sure where I'm gonna go. It's gonna be sort of improv. um, but like you're a photographer. There's somebody else in the room. I think it says there is another person. Let me know who you are if you're in the room too. But I'm just gonna be talking to Mihai. That you're a photographer. I'm not a photographer. I've shot photo and I enjoy it, but like that's not the hat that I would say I wear. And yet, despite that, we're all the same, right? Like we're all making, and we're all looking through our own respective lenses. So for me, I'll just give you a brief into. I started in music kind of like years and years ago, like 14 or 15 years ago. I started playing some music. And I wasn't even like calling myself a musician at that point, but I remember like right when I started playing music, picking up a guitar, and my most base desire, it's kind of funny how these thoughts feel like they're given to you. Oh man, I can't see what you're saying. Hold on, Mihai. You have to leave. Oh, that's all good. Oh man. All right. Well, I'm gonna chat. That's all good. I'm gonna chat. I'm gonna pretend like I'm chatting to you in part because this is where this conversation started. I'm super glad that you were here for a little while. And I'll put this up. It's gonna be like total ramble town. But who knows? Like if it's not worth it, it's not worth it. And if it's great, I'm super happy. So I'll vamp just a little bit about what I'm talking about. I remember like my most base desire before I had ever played music, really learned theory, learned anything, learned technique, was like playing like a couple notes, just totally like on a guitar, and thinking to myself, it's such a funny thought now. Thinking to myself like, I want to learn how to express emotion just through playing one note against another note. What did I mean by that? Like melody, right? Or like harmony, or like constructing motifs. Like I know now what I meant, but I didn't know what I meant. And it's funny to be like, I think I want this thing, but I didn't know what I wanted, So that was years ago, and that was like my most base desire for playing, and I really like have not strayed from that. To just really like, I've always been somebody so desiring of like how to access abstractions, how to access emotional abstractions, like really like playing in a space that is viscerally deep, right? Like something that feels nostalgic without being able to give name to why or how. I like one of my best examples, because it was so tiny, which is like, that's a fun thing, like conversation on restrictions. But one of my favorite examples actually is I had written this song for my band, played it on piano. It's called Lula's by the Sea, Brushed Up Against the Sky. That's the name of the song, and it's just a piano piece. And I had written it, and at the beginning of making the Patreon, Brendan and I were talking about kind of like creating themes. And it's like we made our thumbnails and we made those GIFs, and we kind of created like consistent imagery for the Patreon and for what we were doing here. And the background, like the sort of the banner photo on the Patreon, is like some older art that I had made, re-edited by Brandon. So it's like a lot of really fun collaboration. And in the middle of like talking about some theme sounds, I showed him that piece of music, which I had written like the year before. And that piece of music has a lot of, it's abstract, but it has a lot of meaning for me. It has a lot of, I guess, just power. The moment that I wrote it, you know, it was like basically it was a piece, but then I sort of improv'd around it. That was the recording, and when I listen to it, it takes me back to the moment where I played it. It takes me back to who I was at that moment. It takes me back to who I was in all the relationships that I was. You know, it takes me back to the inspiration for that, which was pretty extreme. In part, it was inspired by this trip that I went on where I was with friends and just sort of experienced some like nature euphoria. So it was just like really, it's a really visceral piece for me, and then it was we ended up using it as the music. We used it and edited it, the theme of it, kind of re-edited, sort of like remixed. With sound and with a modular synthesizer and all that, like really fun, like crinkly stuff, and some Foley work, and we re-edited it over those little stop motion GIFs for each of the tiers, and man, like what a success, because they're like 5-second or 10-second GIFs, and you know, they're like, when I look at them, I'm so boom, like I feel so viscerally attached to what they became as a completely different piece of art. So that's I feel like that's a really exciting example of a re-edit, you know, of like something that I never really even thought that I would do. I'm just making sure on the Discord and all that jazz. Yeah. I don't even know why I came to this. Oh, talking about abstractions. So that was like a piece that started in abstraction and then got further and further and further into abstraction, and like really retains so much emotion. And it's just like that kind of thing is just so exciting. But that's what I've always been down for. That's what I'm always into. And like as a sound designer, what's this say? Oh, cool. Thank you. Thanks, Flat. Thanks, Michai. I'll check it out. You jumped back in and then left. That's all good. Yeah, like as a composer, sometimes you have, you know, you have a lot more opportunity to make things as long as you want, right? Like if it's just for you, you can make a piece that's 14 minutes long or an hour long or like whatever. Obviously, generally, if you're making something in a partnership, you have restrictions, but like as a sound designer, you're usually augmenting the experience of a partnership through minimal augmentation, and that's been really fun. At the beginning of this chat, I was saying to Mihai that like you know, sometimes it can be hard that deciding to put a hat on, deciding to say like I am this kind of thing. And actually the hardest thing for me recently has been like letting myself call myself a sound designer. Like it's like, oh, to me I'm like, oh, that's a really like, that's a high-end job. Do I really have the qualifications? Blah 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 blah. Well, no, of course I do. I've been a sound engineer for 9 years, and I've been a musician and artist for longer, and like combining those into design, into like sound composition, it's totally accessible. But that's kind of a funny thing, like the rejection of that, or the fear of calling yourself something, because it makes you feel like you have to commit to it, or like you have to be, you know, the best at it. So we're like these conversations are going to be about like rejecting that claim that you have to be the best, or you have to be perfect at something. So now I will jump into, because it's just me right now. I will jump into talking about my art a little bit, just because I'm gonna edit my own stuff and my own concepts. So this is a good practice for me. It's kind of, I guess this is sort of selfish, but this is like really good practice for me because I make a lot and I'm in my head a lot, and I think about the significance of what my pieces, have to say a lot. What I look for in making music, I'm talking about stuff for myself or stuff for a partnership with this dance company I work with. Not stuff with Brandon, because usually we're trying to craft something else. Brandon and I, in this work, we're usually trying to make something that is accessible, easy, boom, done, out. Feels good. The sound usually is complementary and it moves forward. And most of the time, it's not my own art. It's not like literally my own original artwork. So I'm just talking about my own stuff. I have always been somebody who considers making art autobiography, regardless of my argument sort of is like, regardless of whether or not you think you're making autobiography, you are, because you are always working within the restrictions of the person that you are, like the physical and mental limitations of who you are, the way that you intake the world around you and then output, and the way that in between that intake and output there's a filter, and that filter is you, because we're not all seeing the world perfectly. We're seeing the world through our own very imperfect and faulty eyes, and processing through our own upbringing, so I've really leaned into that. That's been a desire for over a decade, being somebody who just keeps working, and I'm going to keep working at it until I'm dead, but working at just what it means to write autobiography that isn't about me, which sounds sort of innately contradictory, but to write autobiography that's about the world, right? Like about us. And again, like no matter how I try to say it, it's going to sound pompous. Like if I say I write autobiography, it's like, well, who the hell wants to read or like listen to anything about who I am as a person? That's not like important. And I would say, yes, you're right. It's not important. Like who I am is not the important part. And then you could also say like, who wants to read or listen to who this one dude thinks the world is? But I think it's a combination. It's the autobiography about the combination, the confluence of the world through a lens, and I think we just need more of those things. We need that's all I want in art. All I want to see is other people's autobiography of themselves in the world. But this is all to say that that process is such a process is the art, and process is, one sort of definition of process is just the evolution of self, I think, the evolution of a piece, which is to say the evolution of self as you move forward. As the piece moves forward, you move forward. As you move forward, the piece moves forward. So, I don't know if I'm actually going to there's no point to reading any of this to you, because it's not really meant to be read. It's meant to be sung and all that. But I wanted to find an old. This has a couple years worth of material in it, and I'm actually sad. And that's a funny feeling to be entering into. I didn't expect that. But I'm sad because this book's coming to an end. And one of my favorite things is I think the first entry in here. First entry in here was September 23rd, 2017. So 2.5 years ago, which is pretty awesome. It's a ton of material, just random jots. That's crazy stuff, and one of my favorite things is that I will write just random stream of consciousness, or I'll write lyrics, or I'll write words or motifs that I want to come back to, imagery that I want to approach, or words that I think are significant that I want to delve into. And sometimes in whatever song I'm working on or something, I don't come to that. Like I don't actually use all that material. It's almost like a paint palette, and I don't use all the colors. And so later on, I can come back to. I can be like, if I'm this far into the book, I can just decide for inspiration that I want to look back a little bit and think about who I was and think about what I was trying to say. And sometimes there's like unanswered questions that I then later on in my life, even just a year later, have the answers to. And I can pull some of that information forward. And so I kind of think of it as like I'm like hopscotching or something. Like there's this doop 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 doop. Like I'm bringing the material forward. I'm bringing the concepts into a new area. And one of the things, I wonder if I can even find it quickly. One of the things that is just like my favorite. Oh yeah, I found it. My favorite like note to self is something that I wrote shortly after I started this, like only a couple pages after I started this, and it says note to self, and there's this huge like star. It's like this absolutely like multifaceted. Wow, it's super washed out. I don't know if you can see that. Super multifaceted star. Like I could see my brain being like, don't forget this. Please think this is important. And it took me a long time to even internalize it. But it says, combine the painfully personal, the unrelatably intimate with abstractions and mythologies. Damn. If that isn't exactly what I try to do still, wow, that's like amazing stuff. I don't know, like I don't know who wrote that. I don't know whose hand wrote that, but that's such a cool thing, and it's so cool to be looking back with. I mean, that's before I wrote most of the stuff that I consider to be the most personal, intimate, and abstract and mythological. It's like that was such a call to myself, please don't forget who you are, which is just really cool, and I just think about that constantly. But there's like other things in here that are very much like that, and I would say the best advice that I have, and maybe I'll like keep saying stuff like this, like not that people want to hear me say the same thing over and over, but I think like especially with the Fix Me In post, anybody who's going to come to this, I hope that just like I started this, I hope that through my failures or through my ramblings about making mistakes or being imperfect, being a person who thinks they have an answer and 200 pages later figure out that they didn't, but they can now, that this will be inspiration, or it'll be something that you can decide you want to try and then internalize in a different way. So what I'd say is like, get yourself a journal or get yourself something physical that you can keep looking back into, and moving thoughts forward, and then internalize that however you want. If you want to make that, something else, like if you want to, if it feels good that turns into something else, man, do that. Make it your own thing. I would just say like, if you're at an impasse, go ahead and borrow ideas, borrow techniques from me or Brandon or anybody else that like totally, you can't, I think I said this yesterday on the stream, it's impossible to steal stuff. Oh no, it wasn't on the stream, it was on the Discord a couple days ago. I had this professor once who said, basically, she was really feisty, and she was like, go ahead and fucking try to copy people. This was a printmaking class. She's like, you can't copy things. Like, no matter how perfect you think that you're getting copying a photo or a painting or a piece of music, you're always going to put yourself into it. And like, why try to spend your life trying to remove yourself so that you can copy something? Lean into the part that's yourself. So, her challenge was always start at a point of copying. Start with inspiration from somebody else, and then add yourself on top of it. That's great. That's perfectly welcome. It's not plagiarizing. It's life. It's how we move forward. instead of plagiarizing, instead of thinking about in that perfectionist term, like I like to think of it almost as ancestry. I can look at a piece and think, that other person or this other musician or this writer or friend, is the ancestor of this piece. They helped make it happen, make it possible, Um, so yeah, so like, if there's a technique that you think is useful that I'm talking about, take it for your own and turn it into something else. What else do I have in here? I really like that, like, I think I was just flipping through this, and I, like, again, super early on, I passed a phrase that I know ended up in a much later song. Like, I can feel it's so funny, I can feel myself smiling, and I've just been really working on self-care and self-love. Like, that's really important, and it's something that I didn't think that I didn't have. I didn't think I was somebody who had a hard time really giving myself affection, but I do, and so it's actually every time that I feel a success in that, I can feel it, and I'm proud of myself, and like that's a silly thing to say, I guess, but like looking backwards and like smiling, thinking about the people, all the past versions of myself that wrote all these words, that were struggling with things, and remembering who I was, and all my travels, and all the many footsteps I took, like, man. But yeah, I don't know, I'm like losing myself in this. It's a very good feeling to appreciate the person I've been, I think. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that. To come more forward, oh my god, I've been working on this one song for like that's a funny thing. I've been working on like a couple songs for like almost half this book. I never thought I'd be somebody who had such a difficulty actually putting things into words, but I kind of feel like the more I really lean into abstraction, the more I really lean into painting imagery that is, whatever that phrasing was, I want to keep coming back to it, like visceral, painfully personal, and unrelatably intimate, or whatever I had said. The further I lean into that, I'm going to bookmark that page because it's just such a good page. The more I lean into it, the harder it is. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I guess like the more I lean into it, the more I look back at some earlier pieces and feel like, oh, well, you really tried, but you didn't exactly hit the mark. And it doesn't mean I don't like the pieces. It means I can, when I play them, that's the beautiful thing about music. When I play them, I can put my present version of myself into those. But like, I just, to look back and to say, I don't know if you really hit the mark there. I don't know if you really got what you wanted to say out. And so I get to make that new portrait. That's something that I'm going to jump forward. I'm sorry this is scattered, or I'm not sorry, I don't really know. This is something that I wrote to myself. This is another note to self. Usually I don't do that. I really don't do that a lot. I write like lyrics, and I write ideas, and I write things that move forward and snowball effect into the present. But I felt like I just had the urge to do it, and I'm sure it'll be pertinent to me in 3 years. But I wrote, let me make sure I don't say anything I don't want to say in public. I say, light changes on a face. We paint the same contours again and again, to learn not just the beauty of patience, but that of shifting light of relationships. To tell a story once is to canonize. To tell a story over is to acknowledge it lives alongside us. And I think even just a couple days later, that was just 4 days ago, and even just a couple days later, I feel Like, I know what that means even more than when I wrote it. Um, the idea of, like, when I thought about that when I was just talking about, like, oh, I don't really know if you hit your mark. I wrote this song called The Willow on my first album. The album's called Within Without. And The Willow is, like, very dreamy. I think that I did hit the mark. I definitely got into a place that I wanted to start exploring further with that album. In the moments where I'm really delving into like abstract imagery that doesn't have to be exactly a scene, like a play, like one verse can be in one place and another verse can be in another place, and it's very dreamlike. And I think that's the place that I really want to reside. But with The Willow, there was so much that I was trying to tackle, and I'll talk about it, I guess. Actually, The Willow is a great place to start because I like to think about how I really fucked up the first version of it. When I first started writing it, my thought was, I want to paint a scene that is what it looks like in my process. And that was almost verbatim what the desire was. It was like, I want to paint the imagery, right, with words and music and sound. I want to paint the imagery of what it looks like inside of me, I guess. And that was as concrete as I had. It was very vague and ethereal. And the first version that I wrote was weird. And I was just talking about it yesterday with my collaborator Doug, because he's the only person I think who ever heard that version, and he was very kind, and he was like, "It's not it." Basically, like, you're almost there. It's not it. And there was a lot of things that just weren't it at that time. And so I started thinking more about it. I was like, well, why do I want to do that? Why do I want to say these things? Like, why do we want to say the things we want to say? When I say, like, I want to look into myself, what am I really trying to say? And why can't I access that? So even the inability to access it became part of the piece, right? Like, what it ended up becoming was a portrait of who I was at the time, longing for answers and longing for just knowledge about myself and where I fit into the context of the universe, and I completely reconstructed it. I actually took all the ideas from it. I probably have it in here, but I took that original version and I deconstructed it. So all the verses and all the ideas for each verse, I basically wrote out next to each verse, like, Jacob, what are you trying to say? Why are you saying these words? And I just made myself give a defense of what I was talking about. Why are you talking about this? When you say this, what do you mean? And it was like one of those things where it was like, nobody needs to know exactly, like, nobody needs to be able to know what you meant. They need to be able to know that there's cohesion in the sentiment, So I worked really hard at, like, paring away all the stuff that was unnecessary in that original not great piece. And what's funny is, like, 2 years later, almost probably exactly 2 years later, because I started writing that piece at the beginning of 2018. Almost exactly 2 years later, there's still material that was in there that I'm bringing forward, stuff in that original version, and I didn't think about it until just now, but stuff in that original version that I wanted to tap into, that I never got the chance to because it didn't fit, that I still felt like I had unanswered questions, that I'm answering those questions now in pieces later on, which is just so, like, mind-boggling. It's just such a fun thing. Like, making over time is a beautiful thing. But yeah, so I took that original piece and I like basically just destroyed it, you know, parsed it away and broke it into a bunch of chunks, and totally recontextualized. And I think another thing that I did that was really good, and I've actually used this concept again, was that when I like wrote out my defense of what each piece meant, like what are you trying to say, then I took that piece of paper and I hid it away from myself, and I took a blank piece of paper and I wrote, just with whatever memories I had of the other piece and of what I was trying to say, I wrote a completely new piece. And then once I was done feeling like I had gotten a lot of things out onto that new piece, I looked at both of them and I picked the best, and I worked on a third new piece that was the best of all of those things and the most cohesive. So that's like that was accidentally a great place to start talking about the willow. I don't actually remember why I started talking about the willow, though, other than that it came from from a different version of itself. But here I am now working on a piece that talks about some stuff from the willow again. Oh, that's what I was talking about. This is so much easier when you have two people, the other person able to reel you back in from your tangents, or vamp for a while you figure out what the hell you were trying to say. But that idea I'll read again. I'm reading this for myself as much as I am for you. Light changes on a face. We paint the same contours again and again, to learn not just the beauty of patience, but that of the shifting light of relationships. To tell a story once is to canonize. To tell a story over is to acknowledge it lives alongside us. So, you know, I was looking for answers, and I satiated myself temporarily in the willow. And then for 2 years of playing that song now, I've brought up more questions, and I can answer them again. I can do another portrait of myself, and I think that's what being a maker is, you know. I think that was the hardest thing. Like, if I can name the most difficult thing in my last year of making, it's been realizing that just because I put an album out and then I put an EP out and I said a bunch of stuff that I wanted to say, it doesn't mean I'm done saying those things, you know. And it doesn't mean if I try to say them again, I'm a fraud, you know. Like, again, coming back to that perfectionist thing, that's such a Western, like, such an American thought. Like, oh, if you fail, you know, people are going to realize you're a fraud, right? It's like imposter syndrome. It's such a bad thing, because it's false, and it's so false, and it's so staggering and incapacitating as a maker to think those thoughts, to be like, oh, people are gonna think that photo looks like another photo that I took 3 years ago, and then they're gonna boo it. No, nobody's gonna think that. Like, that's not how this works, you know. And if they do, they're gonna think that you did it on purpose, because you did do it on purpose. Man. So I'm here again, and I'm writing stuff that is sort of related to the willow, to the questions that I asked in the willow, because I have more questions, and it's portraiture again. I have another piece that I wrote on that first album that was, again, like, it's all self-portraiture, and it's all dreams, you know. But that piece, the first piece on the album, it's both called Thesis, and it's also just a semicolon, is its name. And that one is very abstractly tackling, this is like total behind the scenes of, you know, my artwork that I would never necessarily talk about otherwise. So, but like that's about me and my growing up and coming into being able to make an album after so much trouble, and paralleling that with my mother, who she is. And so, you know, being able to make a portrait of that. Not a portrait of me, not a portrait of my mom. It's like a portrait of that concept. And I've returned to those ideas. So that too, and I had a moment where when I was writing things and thinking thoughts about new material, I was like, oh, wait, I can't return to that idea because I've already said those things. I've already answered those questions. And then I realized, no, that's not true at all. It's not how this works, we really do have to just keep painting the same portraits. The light changes, right? The illumination changes. Light is a great metaphor. It's like the way that we gain insight changes about our circumstances, about our lives, about the world. And I have more things I want to say that talks more about similar things that I certainly didn't get to tackle in 4 minutes, in a 4-minute long song. How could you, in just a couple verses, how could you tackle all of this emotional, stuff, all these emotional fever dreams, I guess. Because that's kind of what it is. It's just dreams, like incomprehensible dreams. So one piece, to sort of to do a juke to sidestep what I've been saying. One piece that I was thinking about when I was driving over here to do this is this piece that I started. Let's see. I probably started thinking it up in September. And I don't think I've ever had a piece be so difficult. even the Willow, it was quick and easy. I was filled with a lot of inspiration and a lot of need to say things. And I've been letting myself be slower and more caring and more considerate for this album, for this body of work. It's an album that I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know how many people are going to be on it. I have no idea. I'm still building it. I've been building it for over a year, and I don't think I've ever spent this long on anything, without getting to a place where I could be like, oh, I could stop now. No, I'm still uncovering answers. So I started writing this piece, and when I started, there were so many words, and it was coming out of me. It was just, my pen was flowing, and I remember feeling what are you trying to say? Asking myself, oh my God, what are you trying to say? You have so many different ideas, you have so many different thoughts. And it was staggering, actually. It was staggering. I can't think of a better word. It was almost suffocating how many different concepts there were, and how I just did not know. I couldn't figure out what I wanted. Couldn't figure out what I wanted to be saying. I'm gonna have some of these first pages, and maybe I can find them. I'm not gonna read them necessarily, but yeah, it started as this shift in the idea of what the album was going to be. It started because I'd written a couple songs. I'd written 1, 2, 3. I'd written 4. I think I'd written 4 or 5 songs, and I knew that I wanted to shift the tone. They were going to be the first few songs in the album, and I wanted to shift the tone after that, because the album is going to be about collaboration and about trust, and about reaching out, and about placing your trust in the hands of other people, and placing your art and your livelihood in the hands of other people. I'm getting a call that I can't answer from one of my favorite people in the whole world. I'll respond later. Actually, that person who was calling me actually really helped on the albums that I've worked on. He doesn't really know it, but he's very much helped. So yeah, so the first couple songs were about me and about figuring out again who I was, always figuring out who I am and how I am and how I see. And I wanted to shift that. So I actually ended up with some lyrics that were kind of finishing out the album or finishing out that the next song. Were some of the first lyrics were the lyrics that I wanted to be at the end, and it was one of the lyrics was um, we'll be ochre in the underground, the oracles of streetlight. I have this friend who's been a huge inspiration on my music, who that's part of that is me kind of like painting just in one line this memory to it's like sort of a nod to myself about a memory, how all of my art and all of my being can be boiled down to being inspired by this act of this friend who, before I was 21, I went to a show of his. I traveled out to a show of his, and I didn't realize it was at a bar, and I wouldn't be allowed access to the show. So I showed up, and they wouldn't let me in because I wasn't 21. And I basically got a message to him, and just to say like, "Hey, I'm here." And he took a break in between his sets, and in between his sets, he came out to me at night in the city with a guitar, and he stood at the street corner in his break, and he played me music, just me. He just stood there on the street corner, and he said, "I'll play you anything you want. Like, I'm so glad that you came out." And I wasn't, like, at the time, I wasn't even a really close friend of his. I was just an acquaintance. And I wasn't even, at the time, again, I wasn't even playing music that much. Like, it was in a lull. I was making other kinds of art. And he just sang to me. He just played and sang to me. It was nighttime on a street corner in the city, and there were like people walking their dogs by, like walking by with their dogs, and people, young kids walking by, and like people stopping and looking over their shoulders and just keeping going. And it was just this incredibly powerful moment that has just stayed with me for so long, and it's truly like my deepest inspiration. It's truly the thing that I want to be more than anything. I want to be the person. I want to be that person. I want to be able to give people that love, that unconditional love. So this song like started with that, and then and that's like the most concrete that there is of a line. And then, oh my goodness, like that was written down on the middle of September, and then it just like the things that were added became so wild, and there were so many concepts I was trying to jumble into one song that I was just overwhelmed. And it took me a long time, and I started writing other stuff, and I kept coming back to the lyrics. That's probably the most repeated thing I have on here, because I just kept coming back and like being like, well, let me try rewriting the lyrics. Let me try rewriting again and again and again. And it's like I've written it so many times, and eventually I thought about what I did with the Willow, and I came back to it, and I just started minimalizing it. And I just thought, stop being attached. The concepts will come forward when they need to come forward. You can't say everything you need to say. You have disparate ideas in here. I had a stern conversation with myself. And I just like started paring back, just pulling away lyrics, pulling things away, just scratching things out. And I'm like starting to get to something. Only on the 2nd of February. So from September to to just a couple days, 5 days ago, 6 days ago, whatever, did I actually like start to pare away. And then I started to pare away, and then I had to write it again. I had a blank page next to it. So I started to pull back, and then I actually came to a new conclusion that I was like, oh, the order of things isn't right. I need to reorder this. And I started reordering it and giving myself more space to breathe. And it was like, oh, that's what it needed. It needed love. It needed space to breathe. It's like I was trying to, it's almost like I had written this, like, proto song where I, like, basically was like, okay, take a deep breath and say everything you need to say about this in one breath. It's like, no, of course you can't do that. And these songs that I'm writing right now that are supposed to be about collaboration, I'm writing in a new way where I'm writing a structure that I know is going to be added onto by other musicians. So I'm only thinking of these songs in terms of their skeletons, in terms of limited elements of what I can give, and then being able to give that to friends who can add, and then I'll work on it in post later. So it's like that's a fun new process, where in the past I've had like my proto song, my draft, and then I've been able to work on it in post, and the working in post helps it become a finished song. And it becomes very much about my process and just about me. These are different. And so now I'm giving this space. I'm giving it time, and I'm giving it affection. Where once I had it being like, go back. Where once I had it being like, I know I can find it. Like verse, chorus, verse, chorus, right? Simple, like the most obvious kind of thing. Now it's like becoming more abstract. It's becoming its own thing. It's becoming a living and breathing creature, where there's like this verse with a pre-chorus, and then a verse with a pre-chorus, and then the end of the chorus, just a taste, and then the pre-chorus, and then the real chorus with a repetition, and then this final verse that's like this finished up thing, that's where the theme is a combination of all the things that have passed. If you work in temporal fields, if you want to make me happy, if you want to have one happy audience member, and you work in any temporal field at all, my favorite thing is being able to take a concept that's its own concept, do that a couple times throughout a piece. Whether your piece is an hour long or 5 minutes long, boom, boop, boop, individuated, and then as you start to move forward in the piece of art, the things start to glom together and stack on top of each other, and then by the end you have this thing that's greater than the sum of its parts. That's it. That's all for. Anyway, this has been an hour of me rambling, and honestly, like, maybe this has been better for me than it has for any of you. I have no idea. I hope it's been useful. It's been good to talk about some stuff. Like I said, like a lot of these thoughts just ramble through my head a lot. I have these conversations with myself quite a bit. Something Brandon's been on recently is, that I am always on, really, like I'm an advocate for, but he's really been taking the mantle of being the advocate for it, is like, say what's in your head. And so this has been an hour of that, and I really, really hope that for any of you makers out there, musicians or otherwise, makers of your life, that this has been useful, that there's been anything that could be added to your toolbox. And I'd really, really love to hear your thoughts on some of this stuff. I really want this to be a conversation. It's sort of like an atemporal conversation, because we have it, and I get to talk at a camera. Weird. I get to just sit in a studio and talk, ramble for some reason, and then at different times throughout, you guys are getting to listen, and hopefully you're having responses, and I'd really like to know what they are. We can't have it in a live chat, but I'd really like to know what you're thinking. So I'm going to end just with repeating this one thing for myself and for you guys again, because it really resonates, and it's one of those things I need to just like write on my face so that every time I look in the mirror I see it. Light changes on a face. We paint the same contours again and again, to learn not just the beauty of patience, but that of the shifting light of relationships. To tell a story once is to canonize. To tell a story over is to acknowledge it lives alongside us. I'll see you guys around.